Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a medieval village that smells like warm crust, scorched grain, and mild terror. You're asleep on a straw-stuffed mattress in a bakery loft, your face dusted with flour that never quite leaves your skin anymore. Downstairs, the ovens are cooling. Outside, the first rooster hasn't even considered crowing. And already you're awake. Because you're a baker. And in this town, that means you serve the villagers, the Lord, the church, the poor, and the law, especially the law. And if your loaves are even a pebble short in weight, well, there's a pillory in the square that's been eyeing you for weeks. You stretch under a coarse blanket, feet still sore from yesterday's rush before the feast day. The floorboards creak under you like old bones. Downstairs, the scent of yesterday's rye still lingers. Faint fermented, a bit smug about how it rose just right. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time. I love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You swing your legs over the edge and step into your day like it's a stiff apron. Downstairs, your apprentice, barely old enough to remember to tie his belt, is already stoking the oven with alder wood. The heat radiates up into the ceiling beams, making the old bakery feel like a kiln disguised as a kitchen. You grab your flour sack and run your hands through it, watching it fall like powdery snow. This is your good batch, coarsely milled but reliable. You mutter a quiet thank you to the miller, even though you suspect he's skimmed a scoop or two off the top again. He always looks a little too cheerful. You mix with water from the well blessed by the local priest who insists it tastes cleaner when sanctified. You can't taste the difference, but arguing with a man who literally holds a chalice for a living never ends well. Kneading is the part that wakes you. The dough presses back warm and springy beneath your palms like it's testing your patience. You roll, fold press, and roll again. It's rhythm, it's ritual, it's back-breaking and kind of meditative in a sleep-deprived way. But you're not just baking for villagers, you're baking for the system. And that means measurements. Every loaf must weigh a specific amount dictated by a law you've never actually read, but which everyone agrees is older than 3 popes and somehow still in effect. Too heavy and you lose money. Too light and you lose your dignity. You remember what happened to old Ricard. He was caught shaving his loaves just a bit too much, blaming it on shrinkage by air. The bread reeve wasn't amused. Ricard spent 3 hours in the town square tied to a post with his own stale rolls tied around his neck. Kids threw them. It wasn't pretty. So now, every morning, you weigh your dough by instinct. 1 squeeze, 1 pull, 1 perfect guess. You've trained your hands to feel the difference between legal and liability. Outside the village starts to stir. A distant bell chimes 6. You slide your shaped loaves onto wooden paddles and angle them toward the mouth of the brick oven. The fire glows just right, not too high, not too sulky. You learned long ago that the oven listens if you speak nicely to it. Or maybe you're just tired. You glance at the corner shelf where your last batch of fines sits, 3 silver pennies and a pebble. Someone slipped into your basket instead of change. You've kept it out of spite. It reminds you to stay sharp. Your apprentice yawns too loudly and nearly drops a tray of rolls. You resist the urge to thump him with a ladle. Next time, you mutter, try staying awake while measuring salt. He nods sheepishly. You still love the kid, but if he forgets the leavening again, you may rename him Flatcake. The loaves begin to rise. The air fills with that deep, earthy scent yeast smoke crust. It smells like something older than law, like comfort dressed as work. You close your eyes for just a moment, letting the warmth wrap around you like soft cloth. And for a brief second, you almost forget the bread police might stop by today. Almost. The knock comes just as you're pulling the first batch of loaves from the oven. It's not loud, just 2 taps and a scrape, but your spine stiffens like a baker's peel left out in the rain. You know that rhythm, the bread inspector. You glance at your apprentice who freezes mid-roll. You nod toward the back, Wipe your face, hide the burnt ends. He scurries off. You wipe your hands on your apron, pointless since it's more flour than fabric at this point, and open the wooden door. Standing there is a man who looks like he was baked himself. His skin is sun-dried parchment. His beard bristles like barley stubble, and his eyes are the sharp, sour kind that search for trouble even in a prayer book. The bread reeve. He carries the official box, a set of scales, some weights, a scroll of fines, and the dreaded standard loaf, a hard-sealed model of what a proper medieval loaf should weigh, feel, and probably taste like, though no one's dared bite it in years. You nod respectfully. He grunts. No warning this week, he says, stepping inside. Too many bakers cutting corners before the feast day. You gesture to the bench where your morning loaves sit cooling on a linen cloth. They smell heavenly. You hope they weigh like it too. He sets his box down with a thud that makes your stomach clench. From inside, he pulls out the balance scale, two brass dishes dangling from a wooden arm, and sets the model loaf on one side with the gravity of someone performing a sacred rite. You hand him your first loaf. He lifts it, sniffs it, presses the crust, and sets it gently into the other pan. The dishes sway. You hold your breath. They level out. Perfect. He doesn't compliment you. Of course not. He just makes a small mark on his scroll. One tick, one reprieve. Next loaf. This one's slightly smaller. Not by much, but enough that you glance nervously at your apprentice who's doing a poor job pretending to reorganize flour sacks in the corner. The reeve lifts the loaf. Bit light, he mutters. You grit your teeth. But he doesn't reach for the fines scroll. Instead, he raises an eyebrow. You adding more yeast lately? Trying a new ratio, you say, keeping your voice calm. It rises bigger with less flour. Still legal. He grunts again. Not quite approval, but not a citation either. Historians still argue whether medieval inspectors actually knew how to bake, you murmur in your mind. He weighs 3 more loaves. All fine. One just over which he jots down with an exaggerated sigh as if generosity pains him physically. Then he opens the smaller compartment in his box and pulls out a pouch of stones. Yes, stones. These are for random spot tests. The idea is that if a baker's loaves consistently weigh less than the standard, by a stone's worth of fine, or a punishment follows. You hand him the last loaf. He doesn't even weigh it. He breaks it open. Steam rises thick and fragrant. The crumb is good, airy, strong structure, barely sticky. You think it's one of your best. He tears off a chunk, chews slowly, then nods, then spits it into a cloth. It's part of the ritual. Not personal, mostly. Good batch, he says. But don't let your next ones fall short. They're watching bakers in this quarter more closely. Who's they, you ask? He shrugs. The guild. The church. The millers. Who isn't? And just like that, he packs up his box and leaves. You close the door gently. The moment it latches, your apprentice exhales so hard you're surprised he stays standing. You walk back to the bench, pick up the rejected loaf, and tear off a piece. It's warm, soft, rich with barley and rye, legal in every way. And still your heart races just a little. Because when you bake in this world, it's not just about flour and fire, it's about law, precision, survival. The bread size isn't a suggestion, it's a centuries-old promise, one that holds villages together and holds bakers like you accountable. You sit down finally and split the loaf with your apprentice. No more experiments this week, you mutter. They're sniffing around. He nods quickly, already chewing. You lean back, staring at the oven's fading glow, wondering if one day the reeve might actually smile. Then you remember old Rickard, and decide you're not that curious. You wake up the next morning with your fingers still dusted in flour, and your spine vaguely aware of every brick in the bakery's back wall. Your body protests, but your mind is already running weights and ratios before your feet hit the floor. It's market day, which means more mouths, more rolls, and more chances to make the kind of mistake that earns you a very public, very itchy punishment. You shuffle downstairs. The oven's still warm from the night's coals, and the scent of yesterday's rye clings to the walls like a loyal ghost. Your apprentice is already forming dough balls on the counter, lopsided but eager. You reach for the balance scale, that simple, swinging tyrant of your trade. There's one rule you learned early and you've never forgotten it: never underweight a loaf. Because if you do, and someone complains and the reeve confirms it, oh, you're not just paying a fine. You're explaining yourself on a wooden platform in the village square, in front of your neighbors, in front of the goats, in front of every wide-eyed child who now associates you with criminal crusts. You remember the last time it happened to someone? A baker from the next village, name forgotten but reputation eternal. He sold loaves 2 ounces short on flour weight. The bread reeve sniffed it out literally, and the punishment was swift public shaming with the false loaf chain. They tied light loaves around his neck and made him stand with a sign that read, "I stole with my crust." Not exactly subtle. To be fair, the loaves weren't even edible by the time he stood there. They'd hardened into bricks that kids later used for slingshot target practice. You check your own batch now, cautious as always. Each dough piece is weighed on the scale, balanced against the official guild weight, a chunk of lead marked with a crown and possibly bad intentions. They all pass, barely. You allow yourself the smallest of exhales. There's a reason medieval bakers add a little extra to every loaf: the vigilance margin. It's cheaper to be generous than to be punished. So instead of precision, you bake with paranoia. Historians still argue whether the baker's dozen came from this fear or just clumsy counting, you mutter, adjusting one roll that looks suspiciously trim. Your apprentice watches you. They really made him stand there with the bread sign. You nod. He looks at the rolls in his hands like they might betray him. They made another baker carry his short loaves in a basket around his neck. One fell off and hit a bishop's foot. They doubled his fine. You're not joking. You wish you were. The bread sighs. The law that governs every crust you shape is strict. Passed centuries ago, re-inked by kings and enforced by every town reeve who ever dreamed of being feared. It states exactly how much flour should go into a loaf, what it should weigh after baking, and how to scale it depending on the cost of grain that week. The logic: keep bakers honest and bread affordable. The reality: constant math, constant stress. And the worst part: prices change all the time. War drought, church feast days, a goose sneezing at the wrong time. Any of it can trigger a shift in the grain rate. You once had to reweigh your entire stock because of a rumor that the bishop's cousin saw a mouse in a granary. Today's grain rate seems stable, so you proceed. The loaves are rolled, shaped, and loaded into the oven. You sprinkle a few with caraway seeds, a risky indulgence. One boy in the market claims he can smell caraway from 50 feet and always asks for extra. You're not sure he's human. As the bread bakes, you prep your scale again. You always double-check after baking. Some loaves shrink, some don't. It's part science, part mood. You pull the first ones out, golden, even, proud. You tap the crust. It sings back. That's how you know. A crust that sings is rarely wrong. You place one on the scale, then the next, then one that feels suspiciously light. You weigh it. It's legal, but barely. You glare at it anyway as if it should apologize. You look at your apprentice. This one gets eaten, not sold. He blinks. It's fine, though. You raise an eyebrow. So was Rickard's, until it wasn't. He eats it quietly. As the market bell rings in the distance, you begin loading the cart, fresh loaves stacked with reverence. Each one a silent promise: I did the math. I played by the rules. Please don't ruin my week. You wipe your hands, stretch your back, and step into the sun. The bread police won't find fault today. You've checked. Twice. You reach the market square with your cart full of steaming loaves just as the morning sun starts to stretch across the cobblestones. It's one of those deceptively nice days, the kind where everything seems peaceful, but you know better than to relax. Because somewhere in this crowd of cheerful buyers, bored guards, and loose chickens, someone is watching your bread. You set up your stall beneath the crooked awning that leans just enough to spill rain down your back when it's angry out. Today it's just dusty. Your apprentice lays out the loaves in neat rows while you double-check your weights again. You've developed a habit of subtly pressing each loaf as you place it, like a paranoid mother checking for fevers. The market's busy. Everyone needs bread, but everyone also needs a bargain. You've barely begun hawking your fresh-baked barley loaves crusty but fair, before someone starts haggling even though bread prices are literally set by royal edict. "I'll take two for the price of one," a man with a suspiciously clean tunic says. You blink. That's not how bread works. He shrugs. It was worth asking. Was it? As you work the stall, you notice a stir near the east gate. A reeve is making rounds. Not yours, another, from a nearby town, tall and theatrical, followed by two assistants and a very official-looking scale. They approach a rival baker's stall across the square. You recognize her, Sabina. Good crust, loud opinions, not always careful with flour weights. She sees the reeve and immediately starts buttering him up, metaphorically, of course. Actual butter is too expensive. She offers him a complimentary loaf. Bold move. He sniffs it, tears it open, weighs it. Too light. You wince. He mutters something and one of his assistants fetches a thin stick of chalk from their pouch. They write on the side of Sabina's stall, "Short weight loaves find." A mark of shame that won't wash off easily. You pretend to focus on arranging your rolls, but everyone's seen it. Customers whisper. Sabina turns crimson. Your apprentice leans in. "That's gonna ruin her week." Or her month, you murmur, depending how loud the gossip is. Then you catch a movement out of the corner of your eye, someone across the way slipping a small pebble into a pouch of flour before weighing the dough. It's a trick, an old one. The pebble makes the scale tip heavier, letting you use less dough without it looking wrong until someone actually tests the baked loaf. Then you're caught. Fined. Or worse, you recognize the culprit. A baker's assistant from downriver. Ambitious, reckless, probably thinks no one's watching. You are. You say nothing, of course. You're not a snitch. But you do very loudly start offering a free heel of bread with every full-price loaf just as the reeve finishes with Sabina. He looks over. You meet his eyes. Then look down demurely as though you've never once bent a rule. He walks on. Your apprentice exhales like a bellows. "Why would someone risk a pebble trick?" he asks. "Because it works," you say, until it doesn't. Historians still argue whether most bakers were honest or just really good at lying with dough you add quietly. By midday, your cart is nearly empty. The caraway rolls went first, of course. They always do. One customer said they smelled like victory. You didn't ask what he meant. You share the last heel of bread with your apprentice sitting on the edge of the fountain, watching the reeve's chalk mark start to smudge in the breeze. You don't feel smug. Okay, maybe a little. You think about the pebble trick again, about Sabina's red face, about how easy it would be to shave just a little weight just once. But then you remember the reeve's scale, and the chalk, and Ricard's stale necklace parade. You decide you'll stick with honesty, at least until grain prices rise again. The sun slouches toward mid-afternoon as you trundle your empty cart back home. Wooden wheels clunking over every cobblestone like they're personally offended. Your back aches, your fingers are dry, and your apprentice is humming a song about barley that he definitely made up. But you're not done yet, because tucked under the flour sacks and wrapped in linen is a smaller basket, the tithe loaf. Larger than the rest, perfectly measured and destined for the church. Tithes aren't optional. A portion of every day's baking must go to the monks and priests for the glory of the Lord and the maintenance of local piety, as the Guild Scroll puts it. The reality, a polite tax with religious undertones and very real consequences if you forget it. You reach the small chapel at the edge of the village. The priest assistant, Brother Clement, greets you with that holy smile that hides how often he criticizes the crust. You hand him the loaf. He lifts it, nods solemnly, then weighs it in front of you. Standard practice. It passes, barely. You allow yourself the smallest flicker of smugness. Then he coughs. "Where's the extra loaf for the widow's alms?" You blink. "That's not due until the feast day." He shrugs. "She's hungry today." You pause. Then pull another loaf from your cart's secret stash. This one's slightly underweight but shaped to look fuller. You hope he doesn't check. He doesn't. He's already walking away praising the Lord under his breath. As you turn to leave, a small child darts past you and makes a face. The bread last week was burned. You frown. That was your mother's. Maybe your taste is the one that's burned. She sticks out her tongue. You sigh. Public relations is not your strength. Back at the bakery, your apprentice is already measuring flour for tomorrow's dough. You double-check the weight. He rolls his eyes. Do you trust me at all yet? You lift the scoop again. You just overcounted by a handful. Barely. Barely will still get us pilloried. He groans and starts over. You pass by your shelf of finds again. 1 copper coin from last winter's flour misallocation incident. 2 bent nails from a barter gone wrong. And a rock. Just a rock. No one knows how it got there, but you keep it. For luck or spite. Your apprentice pauses. Why are we still baking for the monks if they're not paying us? They are, you reply. With forgiveness. He doesn't look impressed. You sit beside the oven and tend the coals. Your fingers are cracked. Your apron smells like smoke and yeast. The air is warm, thick with the scent of ash and ambition. You remember an old story. A baker once refused the church tithe and claimed divine exemption. A week later, lightning hit his oven. Or maybe it was just a chimney fire. Either way, he tithed after that. Historians still argue whether tithes fed faith or just the hungriest monks, you murmur, tossing a kindling stick onto the flame. The rest of the day passes in quiet chores, scrubbing the mixing table, mending the flour sacks, sweeping the corners where flour collects in little drifts, like pale snow. Your apprentice keeps humming now about honey bread and angry saints. Just as you're about to close up, a knock comes at the back. Not the reeve. The manor steward. You open the door cautiously. He holds up a scroll sealed official and threateningly folded. Lord Edric requests your finest loaf for tomorrow's breakfast, to be delivered before sunrise. And it must be his words, crusty like victory and soft like virtue. You stare. He shrugs. He's poetic. You accept the scroll, close the door, then turn to your apprentice and say, well, no pressure. Just make sure this one won't get us kicked out of the village. He grins. I'll add extra virtue. You shake your head laughing despite yourself, because tomorrow you'll rise again in the dark. Knead by candlelight. Bake under pressure. And hope the bread behaves. The sky is still a deep blue bruise when you wake. Stars are fading. Roosters aren't even considering it yet, and your bones haven't agreed to cooperate. But Lord Edric's loaf won't shape itself. You roll off the mat tiptoe past your snoring apprentice. He'll be up soon. No need to drag him into this hour and descend the stairs with the elegance of a bag of oats. The oven's dark and moody. You light it carefully, whispering to the coals like you're coaxing an old friend who once saved your life but still owes you rent. The Lord's order is no simple loaf. It must be large, round, slightly domed like a helmet with a crust that sings when tapped, and an interior soft enough to appease a man who once declared his goose too chewy. You mix the dough slowly with water. You drew yourself to avoid the chapel well's mysterious blessing funk. Your hands are stiff, but the rhythm settles you. Fold, press, turn, breathe, and then, guess what? The salt's gone. You stare at the empty jar. Blink, stare again. You check under the prep shelf. Nothing. You check behind the flour sack. A small mouse blinks back at you like it knows you're suffering. You run upstairs. Shake your apprentice awake. Did you refill the salt? He blinks. You told me not to touch the salt anymore after the brining incident. You inhale, slowly. I meant don't oversalt. He yawns. You should really say what you mean. You resist the urge to throw a stale crust at him. Instead, you hand him a coin and send him running to the spice merchant whose stall will just be opening if he's quick. You return to the dough and stall, kneading slower than usual, trying to time everything to the return of the salt. You pray half-jokingly to Saint Honoratus, patron of bakers. You don't know if he's listening, but it can't hurt. Salt arrives. You mix it in, gently muttering soft apologies to the dough for the delay. Then you shape the loaf. You roll the top tight, folding it inward, smoothing it like fabric. It sits heavy in your hands, serious, important, like a tax disguised as a treat. You set it in the oven. The flames lick it kindly. This is where the real test begins. Because medieval ovens don't have thermometers or timers. or windows. They have instinct, smell, sound. You've learned to read the heat by the ash color to listen for the quiet popping as the crust tightens. Your apprentice once called it the bread singing. You told him not to romanticize it. You crouch by the oven watching shadows flicker on the walls. The air smells of rising flour and something ancient sweat hope and carbonized prayer. At the edge of your vision, the top of the loaf begins to crack just slightly. A perfect spiral split. You nod. The singing begins. You lean close. The crust pops whispers, tiny hisses of air escaping like secrets. This loaf might make it. You pull it from the oven, set it on a wooden board and tap the bottom. Hollow, crisp, a fine song. You wrap it in clean cloth and tie it with a ribbon the color of the manor's crest. You even sprinkle a little extra flour over the top. It's not necessary, but you're feeling bold. Your apprentice appears brushing flour from his hair. Did it work? You lift the loaf. He whistles. Looks like a hymn. You nod. Let's just hope it doesn't taste like repentance. You deliver it personally, half, because it's the Lord half, because you want to be sure it arrives intact. The manor butler receives it without a word, but his eyebrows lift when he sees the crust. You walk home satisfied. That night, as you close shop and douse the oven, a villager stops you on the road. Did you bake for the manor this morning, she asks. You nod. She smiles. Lord Edric said it tasted like virtue and vengeance. You blink. That's high praise. Coming from him, that's practically divine. You chuckle as you step back into your bakery, the door creaking behind you. And for the first time in days, you let yourself believe that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow's loaves won't betray you. You wake late the next morning. Not late by normal standards, there's still dew on the shutters, and the rooster is only halfway through his second crow, but for a baker it's practically indulgent. Your apprentice, bless him, has already lit the oven. He's even swept the flour corners without being told. This can only mean one thing: he wants something. Guild day, he says too casually. You grunt. Of course. The Bread Guild is holding its quarterly meeting, and attendance is voluntary in the same way that breathing is optional. You trudge downstairs, grabbing a half-stale roll as you go. The oven's heat greets you like an old friend who wants money. You eye the ledger where today's weights are noted, each batch with its own crust-style grain ratio and margin for error. But today, you'll be baking under supervision, because when the Bread Guild meets, it sends out inspectors. Not just Reeves, but guild-appointed loafmen whose job it is to ensure you are following all official protocols. Not just weight, not just ingredients, everything. Your apprentice looks nervous. Should I start shaping? You shake your head. No mistakes today. You reach for the guild rulebook, an absurdly large scroll stored in a clay tube next to the broom. It details every standard from flour origin to crust coloration. It even specifies acceptable bread noises when broken. Apparently, a loaf that crumbles too quietly is suspect. You prep your workspace like a battlefield. Ingredients in neat rows. Water cooled to the right temperature. The salt measured twice. You even rewrap your apron for good luck. Mid-morning, the loaf man arrives. He wears the traditional black hood, part mystery, part drama, and carries the guild staff, which is less staff and more glorified stick. Still, it bears the guild seal, and you're not inclined to test its legitimacy. He speaks a little, simply walks through your bakery, nodding, sniffing, lifting lids. Then he opens a scroll. Today's inspection will focus on adherence to the bread assize of 1266, as issued by King Henry III. You already know this one by heart, but just for fun, he reads it aloud in the voice of a bored librarian. The edict dictates not only loaf weight, but pricing based on grain costs, labor, and most surprisingly, loyalty to the crown. You're not sure how they measure that part. You present your first loaf for inspection. He lifts it, weighs it, then places it beside the guild's brass model loaf. He taps both, twice. You wait. Then comes the knife. He slices it open, inspecting the crumb like it might hide secrets. He breaks off a corner, sniffs it. Doesn't eat it. They never eat it. That would be too human. He records something in his ledger. The inspection continues. Historians still argue whether the bread assize was about public fairness or royal control, you mutter under your breath. The loaf man hears you. He pauses, looks at you. You freeze. Then he smirks. Just a little. You exhale. The inspection ends with a declaration. Your bakery is in good standing with the guild. Continue lawful operations. It's the closest thing to a compliment you'll get this week. He departs as quietly as he came. You and your apprentice collapse onto flour sacks. That was terrifying, he whispers. That was a good inspection, you reply. Outside, bells ring Guild Day festivities beginning in the square. There will be speeches, a bad puppet show about crust law, and probably a loaf-shaped pie to commemorate last winter's frost. You send your apprentice to represent the bakery. You stay behind. Because now finally you can bake for yourself. Just one loaf. No weights, no inspections, no tithes. Just flour, water, salt time. You knead slowly. Let it rise too long. Bake it hotter than you're supposed to. You tear it open with your hands, no knife in sight. The crust cracks wild and uneven. It smells imperfect. It smells like freedom. You wake that night to a knock. Not a polite one, a hasty one. The kind of knock that says someone either set something on fire or really needs a loaf at midnight. You light a lamp. Its dim yellow glow flickering across the bakery walls like nervous shadows. At the door stands Thomas the town watchman, helmet askew, one boot unlaced and breathless. They're coming, he wheezes. The night Reeves. You blink. The who? He leans in. Special inspection. Surprise audit. Town council thinks bakers have been sneaking underweights into evening rolls. You stare. At night, he nods, then glances over his shoulder as if expecting a squad of torch-wielding flour experts to come charging up the road. You sigh and light a second lamp. Of course. You shuffle back inside, heart already racing. Night inspections are rare, but they do happen, especially near feast days or after gossip reaches the wrong ear. You call your apprentice who groans from the loft. Tell them we're closed. You throw a stale heel at him. Tell that to the crust inquisitors. You both descend into the bakery and get to work, fast. You weigh the day's leftover loaves. Most are fine. A few are borderline. You quietly move those to the eaten accidentally by rat's basket. There's a knock, precise, firm, and somehow colder than the wind outside. You open the door to two figures in deep blue cloaks, each carrying a satchel and a portable scale. One even has a sniffing ladle. They step inside silently. Your apprentice mouths sniffing ladle. You mouth back, don't ask. The first Reeve removes a record scroll, eyes scanning down until he finds your name. Evening loaves. Sour rye batch. 3 rolls reported for alms. 1 large rye for temple tithe. 1 batch of sweetbread unreported. You freeze. Sweetbread. Then you remember your apprentice baked a small batch with dried fruit this morning. You forgot to list it. You give him a sideways glare that could curdle milk. They request samples of each item. You gather them carefully, placing them on the inspection cloth with all the delicacy of a royal chef presenting a peace offering to an angry duke. The Reeves begin their work. The scales come out. Loaves are weighed, sniffed, prodded. One is cracked open and examined for air fraud, which apparently is the sin of whipping too much air into the dough. You think about explaining yeast. You do not. Your apprentice tries to look helpful by holding the oil lamp just right. He accidentally drops flour into one Reeves' boot. You pretend you didn't see it. They take out a thin wire hook to test crust density. One Reeve frowns when it sinks in too easily. Another nods when it springs back. They move on to the sweetbread. They sniff it like it might lie. The older Reeve lifts an eyebrow. Dried apple and caraway. You nod. He takes a bite. Wait, what? He chews. You nearly forget to breathe. He swallows, then jots a note, flavor acceptable, crumbs strong, slight overbake on base. You want to hug him. You do not. Eventually, they pack their tools. One leaves a parchment stating bakery found in compliance. Watch your ledgers, no further warnings. You nod and bow like your legs aren't shaking. They leave. The night takes them. You lock the door. You sit on the flour sacks, heart hammering. Your apprentice slides down the wall next to you. They ate it, he whispers. You nod. First time in months. You think we passed? You look at the parchment again. Technically, historians still argue whether Bread Reeves enjoyed power or just needed better hobbies, you mutter. You both burst into tired laughter. The oven is still warm, the lamplight soft. You take one of the sweet loaves, tear it in half, and share it in silence. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, it's just you, the bread, and one final roll that didn't betray you under pressure. And that's more than enough. The next morning greets you with silence and suspicion. No birdsong, no bustle, not even the usual donkey braying 3 streets over. You step outside and inhale cautiously, as if even the air might be holding its breath. You round the corner to fetch water and spot them. 2 apprentices from the neighboring bakery elbow deep in soot, scraping blackened crust off their oven stones. One sees you and looks away. Something's gone wrong. You return to your bakery to find your own oven pouting. The coals didn't keep. You bend down, clear the ash, and prep it for the first fire of the day. Your apprentice stumbles down the stairs, rubbing his eyes. Why is it so quiet? Because someone sabotaged Sabina's oven. He stops cold. You nod. Happened last night. She left the coals banked like always. Woke up to find the oven ice cold and someone had slipped wet ash into her fuel stack. Could have ruined her whole batch, he whispers. Did. You both pause. Then he asks carefully, was it us? You stare at him. He holds up his hands. Just checking. Because I did not do it. But someone did. You sigh. This is where the baking world gets messy. When grain prices rise, when inspections increase, when guild dues are due, and the festival loaves must be twice the size for half the pay some bakers crack. They slip a little ash into a rival's kindling, switch the salt for sugar. Misplace a flour scoop. Nothing permanent, nothing traceable, but nothing accidental either. You remember when it happened to you a year ago? You woke up to find your oven smoldering cold and your apprentice swearing he banked the coals just fine. Your bread was late. Your fines were not. You never caught who did it, but you have suspicions. Historians still argue whether medieval bakers were more competitive than knights, you mutter, poking the oven wall to check for hot spots. You test the hearthstone. It rings flat, still warming. So you do what desperate bakers have always done. You pivot. You mix your dough faster. Reduce the rise time slightly. Shorten the second proof. You won't get perfection, but you might make deadline. Your apprentice lays out the loaves like little soldiers. Some are uneven. One looks like a melted turtle. You shape it again. You bake in waves 2 batches instead of 1. The first crusts too fast. The second is better. You don't speak much. Sabina passes by mid-morning, face pale, arms crossed. She doesn't stop. You nod anyway. By noon, the bakery smells normal. The loaves are decent. The rolls are excellent. Your apprentice even remembers to brush the tops with egg wash without being told. He grins. Sabina will bounce back right. You nod. If her flour holds out, he frowns. You think it was, I think this quarter's gotten meaner. He pauses, then lowers his voice. Should we check our flour? You already did. Twice. Still, you nod. Do it again. By late afternoon, you hear whispers that it wasn't just Sabina. A baker downriver lost his salt. Another found his yeast damp. Someone's poking the bear. You finish the day's records, scratch out the weights, and glance at your own supply room before locking the door. Then you write something in your private ledger, a note in shorthand that only you read. Check coal sack. Watch east wall. You sit on the bench outside as the sun dips low. Your apprentice joins you with 2 leftover rolls. Do you think we're being paranoid? He asks. You break your roll in half. In this town, paranoia is how you stay legal. The crust cracks just right. You both chew in silence. Somewhere a goat bleats. The normalcy is almost funny. And as night falls, you promise yourself tomorrow you'll sleep with one eye on the oven. Because someone's messing with bread. And if they're bold enough to ruin Sabina's crust, they might come for yours next. By the next morning, the air in the market square carries more than the scent of bread. It carries gossip laced with just enough truth to make everyone nervous. You catch wind of it before the ovens are even warm. A cart boy delivering flour stops by your door with wide eyes and an even wider mouth. Did you hear he blurts, barely waiting for hello? 3 villages over, baker sold false loaves. Chalk in the flour. You blink. Chalk. He nods like he's telling a ghost story. White stones crushed fine. Cheaper than wheat. Looked like flour. Smelled like nothing. Someone bit a slice and broke a tooth. You whistle low. That's bold, even by saboteur standards. He adds, Reeve marched him into the square, pilloried, but not just with rope. You already know where this is going. They tied stale loaves around his neck. Of course. The old punishment, the false loaf collar, both theatrical and very itchy. Especially in summer, you thank the boy and close the door, heart heavier than your flour sack. Because even if it wasn't you, it affects all of you. Every baker now gets side-eyed. Every crust questioned, every innocent crack in a rye roll suddenly becomes suspicious. You prep the morning batch with extra care. No shortcuts, no guesswork. Even the apprentice senses your mood and weighs each ball of dough like it holds your reputation, which, to be fair, it does. At midday, a customer hesitates before buying. You don't use powder, do you? You stare. Like chalk? Or crumbled bone? That's what they said in the market. You pause. Then hand her a roll, tear it in half, and say, taste it. She does. Her shoulders drop. Still good. Still real, you think? Back inside, your apprentice looks worried. Will the Reeves start checking everything now? You nod. And they won't just weigh, they'll test. Which means more scrutiny, more inspections, more tension. You pull out your master loaf log, the weight records. Flour source notes, even humidity scribbles. It's the baker's equivalent of a holy book. Because when they come asking, you want numbers, not just crust. You glance at the wall where your fine notice from last year still hangs more as a reminder than a shame. You got docked for inconsistent loaf shape. The irony, that batch tasted great. You start prepping the rye loaves. Halfway through, the mill delivery arrives. You weigh every sack, twice. You find one light, buy a full handful. Historians still argue whether medieval millers were underpaid or just greedy, you mutter. Your apprentice frowns. What do we do? You open the sack, grab a pinch of flour, and rub it between your fingers. It feels off. Too fine, too dry, suspicious. You toss the whole thing. It's not worth the risk. Not this week. Not with rumors flying. Instead, you bake smaller batches with flour you trust. You stretch the inventory, pray for more grain by Friday, and prepare to apologize in advance to any customer asking for double crust. By sunset, your feet ache, but your shelves are clean. Your weight's logged. Your conscience mostly clear. You sit on the step out front, roll in hand, watching the sky turn gold. Sabina passes slower than usual. She nods. You nod back. There's no gloating in baking. Only survival. And the quiet, daily victory of bread that does not get you pilloried. You sleep lightly that night, your dreams filled with collapsing crusts and wagons of flour that somehow talk. When you wake, it's not the rooster that stirs you, it's a knock, a familiar one. You swing the bakery door open to find your apprentice standing outside, breathless, hair half-tied, flour on one cheek. I forgot, he gasps. I forgot the salt. I forgot. Your brain does a full turn on its axis. He holds up a half-formed dough ball like it's a confession. I was rushing. It's the oat batch. We still have time to fix it, right? You look past him into the prep room. There they are. 6 lovely oat loaves rising beautifully, all of them utterly unsalted. You blink. You forgot. The salt. He nods, shrinking 2 inches. You inhale, exhale. Glance at the loaves. If you bake them, they'll look perfect but taste like damp paper. Which is fine if you're feeding monks during Lent, but not when customers want flavor crust and something that doesn't require butter just to be bearable. You weigh your options. Ruin a batch or sneak a fix. You opt for the second. You grab a bowl of salted water and a brush. You coat the rising loaves gently, generously, like you're applying medicine. It won't soak the dough, but it might lace the crust. It's not regulation, but you've seen worse in your day. Historians still argue whether saltless bread was penance or punishment. You mutter while brushing. Your apprentice hovers beside you. Will it work? It'll work enough. You toss the loaves in, bake them hot, and wait. They come out golden, perfect in shape, and oddly noble. You slice one. The crust is salty crisp. The inside soft. A little plain, but not offensively so. You let your apprentice try it. He chews. He chews more. He swallows. It's not bad. You hand him the burnt ends. Next time, double-check your shelf. No salt, no sleep. He nods, still chewing. The day continues in its usual blur of flour and tension. Customers come and go. One woman asks if the oat rolls taste less sinful today. You smile and say they're monk-approved. She buys 4. Later, a visiting friar stops by. You know him, Brother Ulrich, a man who believes bread should be as humble as the soul. He takes a bite. His eyes widen, very reflective. You nod. We're experimenting with restraint. He praises your piety. You praise your apprentice's panic. The irony is not lost on either of you. That evening, as you tally the ledgers, your apprentice asks, "Should we throw out the rest of the saltless batch?" You shake your head. "We'll offer it to the alms basket." But it's not regulation. It's still bread. You pack the loaves in linen and deliver them to the chapel gate under cover of dusk. You don't sign your name. You never do. You sit outside afterward, the last crust in your lap, thinking about what makes a loaf good. Is it the weight, the shape, the flavor, or the fact that it makes someone feel full body or soul? Your apprentice joins you quiet watching the moon rise. You break the crust, share the loaf, say nothing. Not every day ends with praise, but at least today didn't end with fines. And as far as baker's luck goes, that's enough. The next morning, the rooster oversleeps, but you don't. You're already in the storage room frowning at your flour. Something's off, not in a dramatic, "Oh no, it's poison" way. More like, that sack feels oddly light kind of way. You lift one sack, then another. The third one makes you squint. You grab the brass scale from the hook and weigh it. You even bring out a calibration stone to double-check. And, yep, this sack's about half a scoop short. Again, historians still argue whether medieval millers were sly or just forgetful, you mutter as your apprentice enters yawning. "Why are you measuring things before tea?" "Because I don't trust our miller." His eyebrows rise. "The one with the crooked back and the crooked scales, that's the one." You write down the weight discrepancy, then circle it in charcoal. This isn't the first time. But it's the first time it's happened twice in 1 week, which is bold. You send your apprentice to the mill with a polite note. Ask him to explain this. The note is polite. Your tone when handing it over less so. While he's gone, you tidy the front. You rearrange the buns, restack the sweetbreads, and throw out yesterday's heel that could now double as a weapon. He returns 30 minutes later with no note, no explanation, just a shrug and a fresh sack. He said the first sack was meant for pig feed. Got 'em mixed. You stare. We paid for it. He shrugs. He gave you half off on this one. That's not comfort. That's guilt, with powdered sugar on top. You dig into the new sack. It's better. But you still measure every scoop like you're in a courtroom. Because here's the quiet truth. No one likes to say out loud you don't just bake the bread, you have to fight to protect it. From weather, from rot, from rodents, from rivals, and occasionally from the man who sells you your most basic ingredient. You still remember the summer 3 years ago when a baker nearly got shut down because of bad grain from that same miller. The flour had mold hidden deep in the middle of the sack. The Reeves blamed him, not the source. You check for clumps, for smell, for color. It passes. Mostly. You bake small batches that day. Just enough to meet demand. Just enough to keep your nose clean. Your apprentice frowns as he needs. You ever think about grinding it yourself? You glance at him. And buy a millstone and a donkey and spend 6 hours every morning grinding instead of baking. He pauses. So, no. He nods, but the thought lingers. You mark the sack with a chalk X and store it separately. You'll use it, but not for anything important. Not for the noble's table, not for the orphan's rolls, maybe for breadcrumbs, or for that guy who always asks for a discount. As you sweep up the day's flour, you whisper, "Trust but verify." It's not a baker's proverb, but it should be. That night you count the remaining sacks. 7 are good, 1 is not, And the next time you see the miller, you'll smile. And you'll bring your scale. You don't plan to visit the guild that morning, but the guild plans to visit you. It starts with the knock. Again, always with the knock. But this one isn't frantic or cold. It's measured, official, the sort of knock that belongs to someone who has papers. You open the bakery door to find Mistress Elena, scribe of the Bakers' Guild, standing stiff as a bread paddle, parchment, scroll tucked beneath her arm and quill already inked. "Routine dues, check," she says crisply. You blink. It's not quarter's end. She taps the scroll. Adjustment. The Reeves discovered discrepancies in weights across 3 bakeries. All dues recalculated by loaf volume. Retroactive. You feel the quiet thump of dread. The retroactive kind. You invite her in, set out a chair, and fetch your ledger. You know the drill number of loaves, sold sizes, weights, dates. She checks each entry like a hawk counting feathers. "You declared 87 rye rolls the week of Saints' Day," she murmurs. You nod. Exactly 87. She raises an eyebrow. "Records say your market stall was open 5 days that week. That averages to 17 per day. I remember. We had leftover dough Tuesday, made a few extra." She frowns, scribbles something, and moves on. She scans your tithe entries, donation loaves, and sweetbread fees. Then she reaches the controversial line, saltless oat batch. You clear your throat. Error. Corrected before sale. Mostly. You explain the brush-on trick. She pauses. Historians still argue whether surface seasoning qualifies as seasoning at all. You offer, trying to smile. She does not smile. But she writes nothing down, which is something. You bring her a roll. She declines. "I don't eat on duty. Conflict of interest." Of course. 2 hours pass. She finishes tallying. She signs off with a single line, "No dues discrepancy found. Adjustments noted. Be mindful." You see yourself to the door. She stops at the threshold. "You run a clean oven," she says. "But not everyone does. We'll be back next month." You nod. "I'll keep the ledgers warm." She walks away without turning back, her boots sharp against the cobbles. You sit at the counter, suddenly exhausted. Your apprentice pops in from the back, covered in flour. "Did we pass?" "For now." He nods. "Cool. Because I may have sold the last cinnamon roll before it cooled and the guy's tooth cracked." You squint. "You what?" He holds up a coin. He tipped anyway. You rub your eyes. Tell him next time to let it rest. He grins. "Or chew slower." You mark down tooth incident in the ledger just in case it ever comes up. The afternoon passes without further drama. A nobleman's servant picks up a dozen brown loaves. A washerwoman buys the slightly burnt ends for half price. 2 kids steal a roll and you pretend not to notice. You bake, you breathe, you measure everything twice. Because in this town, you're not just a baker. You're a clerk, a diplomat, a sometime lawyer, and apparently a salt chemist. But still, there's nothing like that first crust crack when a fresh roll hits the board just right. The outside world forgets. The guild forgets. Even your customers forget. But the bread remembers, and it forgives you anyway. You wake to thunder. Not the stormy kind. No. This is the official kind. Boots, marching, and then the unmistakable clang of a Reeves bell being rung right outside your bakery. You fling on your apron like a knight grabbing a shield and rush to the door. There stands Reeve Tomlin, tall, red-faced, and already sweating despite the morning chill. His scribe trails behind him with ink-stained fingers and a frown that seems permanent. "We're doing a full bread sweep today," Tomlin announces. Unexpected. Surprise quality check. You blink. "But I passed inspection 3 days ago." "New orders," he says, clearly enjoying this. You nod slowly, step aside, and gesture him in. He enters like he owns the oven. You watch him sniff a rye loaf, poke at a sweetbread, and inspect your flour with the intense scrutiny of a cat judging a cushion. Your apprentice hovers nearby, eyes darting. Tomlin taps your scale. You use this. You nod. He places a regulation weight on it. It tips ever so slightly. He narrows his eyes. You adjust it with a flick. It levels. He grunts, dissatisfied that you're not sweating yet. Historians still argue whether medieval bread laws were about health or hierarchy, you mutter. Tomlin doesn't laugh. He moves to your rack of cooling loaves, picks one up, stares at it like it insulted his mother, breaks it in half. Too airy. You stare. That's the wheat chestnut hybrid. It's supposed to be light. He sniffs it again, shrugs, and drops it back with a little too much force. The scribe mutters something. Tomlin nods and scribbles. You peek. It just says loaves satisfactory. Scale adjusted. Temper insolent. Typical. He asks about your flour source. You show him the marked sacks. You even point out the one you set aside for being suspiciously light. Tomlin raises an eyebrow. You didn't use it. Not for anything meant to taste good. He almost smiles. Almost. After another 30 minutes of poking, prodding, and pointedly avoiding your excellent cinnamon rolls, he leaves with a grunt and no fine. Victory. You sit on the flour sack and breathe. Your apprentice sumps beside you. Why do they hate us, he asks. You chuckle. Because we feed people. That sounds noble. No, I mean, we literally feed people. Which means if anything goes wrong, they blame us first. You nod. Exactly. You pull out the logbook, mark today's inspection, and write satisfactory. As usual, no thanks given. You get back to baking. By noon, word spreads that 2 other bakeries were fined. One for underweight loaves, the other for unwholesome texture, which is Reeve speak, for it felt weird and I don't like it. A customer comes in wide-eyed. They didn't fine you. Nope. She buys a dozen rolls. By the time you close a shop, you've sold out everything but the slightly too brown rye crust ends. Your apprentice takes one, chews it slowly. Do you think the Reeve ever actually enjoys bread? You consider, then shake your head. He's allergic to joy. You scrub the counters, wipe down the scales, and double-check the salt shelf for the 5th time that week. Everything's in place. You step outside, stretch, and look down the street. Sabina stands at her door, arms crossed. She raises a loaf in silent salute. You raise your apron in return. Because in this town, rivalry isn't just about crust. It's survival by crumb. And tonight you survived again. The final market day of the month begins with a silence so rare you almost don't trust it. No shouting, no Reeves bell, no one knocking. Just dawn light through the shutters and the soft crackle of last night's embers in the oven. You take your time prepping the dough. No rush, no dread. Even your apprentice moves slower, humming something tuneless while dusting the bench with flour. You check the scale, still balanced. You run your fingers along the shelves. No splinters, no soft spots, no shameful crumbs. Everything's calm. You bake rye loaves with gentle hands. You roll out honey cakes with a kind of reverence. You even tie the sweet bread parcels with a bit of twine just for flair. Mid-morning, an old widow waddles in, clutching a single coin. She asks for whatever's warm. You give her a fresh oat roll and tell her the coin's too shiny to take. She chuckles, tells you your beard is crooked, and waddles back out. Later, the kids who usually steal rolls actually ask this time. You pretend to think about it, then toss them a half loaf each and say, "Today's a goodwill day." They run off whooping like you just gave them swords. Even Sabina stops by, not to gloat, not to scowl, just to ask how your almond glaze held up in the rain last week. You answer, and for the first time in months, you talk like bakers, not enemies. Historians still argue whether rival bakers were more competitive or just lonely. You muse later to your apprentice, who nods with a mouthful of burnt crust. By sunset, you've sold everything but a single crooked heel no one ever wants. You leave it on the step, for cats or ghosts. Inside, the warmth of the oven lingers long after the fire's out. You sit at the back table and pour a cup of that slightly sour beer the brewer insists is refined. You sip, you sigh, and you let your shoulders drop. Because this month you survived inspections, rivalries, fines that weren't fines, flour, fraud, oat mishaps, and salt scandals. And somehow no one died. You flip your logbook shut, not with a snap, with the softest thwop, like a pillow being laid down. You turn to your apprentice. Tomorrow we scrub the oven. He groans. Can't we rest? You grin. That is rest for the soul. He rolls his eyes. You lean back watching the last light fade through the shutters. Another month done. Another dozen stories behind every crust. Another quiet victory that smells faintly of cinnamon and ash. And as the bakery darkens, you let that stillness stretch. Let the fatigue soften. Let the flour on your sleeves become the mark of a job mostly well done. And you drift slowly into the wind down. Your body grows heavy now, but pleasantly so. Like the weight of a dough you've kneaded perfectly elastic, rested whole. The scent of warm crust lingers in the air, even if the oven's gone dark. You imagine it, the rows of loaves lined up like quiet soldiers, each with their own little imperfections. Their proud little crowns and creases, baked, cooled, and chosen. Outside the cobbled street hushes to stillness. The last clack of heels has faded. The wind pulls at old market banners, making them sigh rather than flap. In the back room, your ledgers rest. Unbalanced once maybe, but now in a kind of truce. Scribbled notations, soft smudges of charcoal, and a single grease spot from that one cinnamon bun you definitely ate during work hours. You lean your head back, let your breath settle. You did what you could. No one asked you to be perfect. Only precise, mostly honest, occasionally lucky. The bread didn't burn. The flour didn't lie. And the reeve, well, he scowled and left, and that counts as a blessing. Even rival bakers sleep now. You imagine their ovens cooling their aprons, hanging their dreams full of sugar yeast, and maybe the occasional accidental blessing. And yours are calm. You're not just a baker. You're a keeper of small comforts. And tonight, you've earned yours. So rest, sleep. Let the dough rise without you for once. You'll shape it tomorrow.